everyone, welcome back to another session of 8x Pixel 360 Virtual Expo, the February series, happening every month as we convene over a united cause, that is our love for diving and the ocean. So for today's session on animal behavior, I'm really happy to introduce a wonderful pair here with us today, Anita Verdi and Peter Marshall. So before we dive into this wonderful presentation on the behaviors of the Australian giant cuttlefish, let me introduce the two of them. So Anita is one half the seas photography, landscape photographer, and a freelance writer with a passion for the underwater world. Based in Melbourne, Australia, and with a professional background in tourism strategy, brand management, and marketing, when she is not on a mountaintop or underwater, she also works professionally in her private consultancy business, K2 Group, alongside his partner, advising governments and the tourism industry on sustainable destination planning and development, investment attraction, government relations, brand strategy, and marketing. Our second guest, Peter, is the other half of the duo at Sun is the Seas, water and landscape photographer with a passion for underwater. Based in Melbourne, Australia, and with a long professional career as a senior executive in local government and private sector, when he is not on a mountaintop or underwater, he also works professionally in his private consultancy business, K2 Group, advising governments and the private sector on government relations, investment attraction, property development, planning, and sustainability. So now I'll pass it over to the fantastic couple here to share their amazing experience diving up close and personal with the Australian giant cuttlefish. So the floor is yours, Anita. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kuji. Thanks, everyone. Great to have everyone watching today.
Hi, everyone.
So we're just going to share our screen. We've got a presentation here to go through. So today we'd like to talk to you about the incredible Australian giant cuttlefish, and more particularly the mass aggregation that happens every year in South Australia. So this is the only mass aggregation, spawning aggregation of cuttlefish anywhere on the planet. And so it's really, really quite unique. So in July last year, we were privileged to get some diving in during the Australian borders, which were opening and closing all the time. And we managed to get to South Australia to dive with the cuttlefish here. So this is who we're talking about. So this is the Australian giant cuttlefish, so Cypia apma. It's the largest species of their kind in the world. And the first thing you'll notice about them, apart from their incredible colouring and almost elaborate costumes, is their size. So the males actually grow up to about 1 metre in length and are absolutely whopping 10 kilos. And sadly, they're actually near threatened on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species.
It's massive.
Yeah. So this is where it happens. So you can see that little red dot on the right of the screen. So every year the giant cuttlefish arrive between the end of May to early August at a little place called Point Lowley in Whyalla in South Australia. So it's about a 5-hour drive from Adelaide. And they arrive in their absolute tens of thousands. So last year when we dived the aggregation, they had 107,000 giant cuttlefish visit the breeding grounds. But the year prior to that was almost 250,000. And we'll talk a bit about a population later because it is one of the issues they're facing. But the incredible thing is no one actually knows where they come from. So the Australian giant cuttlefish is found throughout all the sort of southern area of Australia. And we don't even really know, though, why they actually choose this location. And, you know, when you go out on the dive there, you see it's actually quite rocky. So there's lots of nice little sort of sheltered spots for them to actually secure their eggs. So we think obviously that is certainly an attraction. And as I mentioned before, it is actually the only known mass spawning aggregation of cuttlefish on the planet. And some people might have actually seen it in the BBC's Blue Planet 2 series. And since then, obviously, it's become quite popular for divers, particularly from all over the world, to actually come to witness this amazing event. The lighthouse that you see there is actually right there in those waters. So the cuttlefish actually just migrate to a breeding ground just right next to that lighthouse. It's quite a small, tiny little area. So because of such large numbers, it is quite competitive when it comes to mating, and males can actually outnumber females to, 11 to 1. So it's quite incredible in the sense that you've got males fighting each other, they're spraying ink at each other, they've sort of got their long sinuous arms outstretched and carrying on. And to be honest, we didn't actually really know where to point our cameras when we got in the water, because, you'd look here and there's like 10 cuttlefish, you'd look there, there's a few more, and over there, there's more. And really, it's only in like sort of 5 to 10 meters of water. So it's actually a really, really easy dive to do. But deciding where to actually settle to watch the behaviour can be quite challenging because there's just so many of them. But we decided just to settle by a small female, and she was soon joined by a number of male cuttlefish. And, this is some of the antics they display. And, Peter and I were in Buenos Aires a couple of years ago watching a tango show. And when we got off this dive, Peter said to me, it's just like the tango of the seas. They've got all these costumes, there's arguments, costume changes and, flirtation and the fiery sort of embraces. And so it was a really, really special thing to actually witness. The funniest thing was, though, and we certainly weren't prepared for this because, we've been diving for, a number of years, but I had actually never had read anything about this previously before. But we worked out that it's actually all brains over brawn when it comes to cuttlefish love. So as you can see on the right of the screen, you've got one of the dominant bull males. The female is there on your left of screen, and you can see her colouring is actually a little bit different.
Yeah.
And then you've got this tiny little male cuttlefish there that seems to have actually managed to get into the mating arena and has actually been the one that's had the chance to mate. And what we found with this one is what was actually going on is that the female started displaying this, white stripe on the side of her body. So the dominant bull male was in there. He had been, strobing and carrying on and making sure that all the other males were, heading off on their way. And we thought, okay, yeah, he's definitely going to be the one that's going to get to mate. But it was actually the female that decided in the end. So she was pulsing this sort of white stripe on the side of her body, which sort of warded him off. And then from like the left of centre, we find here's this tiny little male cuttlefish who just before our eyes managed to just totally put on the art of mimicry and actually change the coloration of his skin and his behaviour, hiding his male fourth arm until he actually looked like he was female. This totally confused the dominant bull male, and he was thinking, oh, wow, now I've got two females there. But well, so he thought anyway. And then all of a sudden, just like that, the little male comes on in and they meet head to head, and he passes her his sperm package, which she stores in a little area under her mantle until she's ready to lay her eggs. So this is what you call, I suppose, the sneaker male. I have also heard it referred to as cross-dressing males and other things, but the female though will actually mate with multiple partners. So not all is lost for this big bull male. He might get a chance a bit later. So yeah, it was quite incredible.
Yeah. So when this sneaker male comes into the picture, was there like a change in dynamics, or were the males completely fooled?
I think he seemed quite fooled because the male had actually changed his colouring to look female. The dominant bull male actually seemed a bit confused, didn't he?
And the female was saying, step back, I don't want you, with her white stripe. So
Damn.
he backed off and let the little one sneak in.
It's pretty cute. Yeah, and yeah.
So this shot just shows this happening. So these are all in mating mode, these cuttlefish, and yet Anita is so close to them. Now, normally with cuttlefish on a reef, they back away from you. So in terms of behavior, it's very different while this mating, when they're in mating mode in this aggregation. So Anita had the macro lens on, and you'll see some shots she's taken up very close. She got to within like 200 millimeters of these large cuttlefish, and they didn't take any notice of it virtually. They were too focused on what they were there to do. once in a lifetime event.
Yeah, so that's the thing, because the cuttlefish are semiparous, they only have one mating time in their entire lives, and their lives are short, like less than 18 months. So it's a pretty big deal for them, and so they didn't care that we were there at all. As long as we weren't threatening, they were quite fine.
Right. But like generally, do they stray away, or do they, if they see another human, or are they
Usually,
Normally.
yeah.
Yeah.
We find, so for example, we were up on the Great Barrier Reef earlier in the year, and it's very challenging to take a photograph of a cuttlefish there. They tend to just, just race off
Yeah.
really quickly.
Mm.
These cuttlefish are very different from other species.
Yeah, this is, if you come and dive with these in this annual event, you will have tens of thousands of these around you, just letting you just gently dive around, take photos and get up close. It's great. It's really unique.
So this is a bit of a close-up photograph I took with the macro lens, and you can really see some of the differences in the skin coloration. So the giant cuttlefish actually have up to 200 chromatophores, so pigment cells, per square millimetre on their skin. So these cells just manage to be able to create this incredible sort of kaleidoscope and galactic display of different colours, patterns, and textures as well. So you can see another one here, totally different again, beautiful, beautiful colours.
Yeah.
This one here, like this is probably a little bit more similar to what a lot of people would see, where they're changing their skin to really blending to their surroundings. So you can see they're absolutely taking on the seagrasses there and those colours. But the really interesting thing, and whilst it's not really confirmed, a lot of people are talking about the fact that they actually think that there are regional differences in the male colour patterns across the different populations of the Australian giant cuttlefish in Australia. So, for example, the ones that you might find diving at a place called Cabbage Tree Bay, which is just off the coast, on the east coast, just near Sydney, they tend to be really quite bright red, almost like a hot red chili type colour. But the ones here in the Upper Spencer Gulf in South Australia, they believe could actually potentially be a different subspecies. So they actually have genetic differences in their skin colour patterns, particularly for the males, which is quite amazing. So
the females are around the same, or?
Yeah, look, I'm not 100% sure, because like I said, it's not, it's just, I suppose, speculative that there might be different subspecies, but they do particularly talk about it from a male perspective, that the male colour patterns are quite different. So whether they have just different types of pigments in their cells, depending on whether they're from the East Coast near Sydney or South Australia, it's quite unknown. This just shows a little bit of the texture, and a lot of people, if you're a regular diver, you'll see how they change amazing textures with their skin patterns. And of course, their eyes. When I took this photograph, actually, with the macro lens, like Peter was saying before, I was actually quite close. And I was a bit worried, like I had my strobe lights on, and I thought, I only just took 1 or 2 shots because I didn't want to obviously hurt their eyes. But they are colourblind, but they do actually have some of the most highly developed eyes in the animal kingdom. So they can still detect polarised light, and they actually have sort of little skin flaps over their eyes, and the shape of their eyes, which is a bit like a W, if you can see there, also helps protect the light from coming into their eyes. They are also very intelligent. So like the octopus, they can solve complex puzzles. And when I took this photograph, the one thing I could tell is this cuttlefish was quite socially aware. So it was just as aware of I as I was of it. So the intelligence of these animals is quite astounding. And you can see that when you're out diving with them. They are absolutely, they're just very, very aware, very socially aware, and very, very intelligent. They also have one of the largest brain to body sizes of any invertebrate. So that, I suppose, makes sense. And they actually have 3 hearts, believe it or not. So they have two hearts for pumping blood to their gills and the other heart to pump blood around, oxygenated blood around the rest of their body. We like to think, they've got three hearts because they like to mate with multiple people as well,
Cheeky.
Cheeky, yeah. Here's just a picture of the incredible strobing that they do with their skin. So you can see just on that left of screen, you've got these amazing sort of dark patches there. Yeah. And they sort of move around. It's like this sort of galactic sort of trance-like thing. And they also do that when they're trying to attract their prey as well. So they'll start strobing and waving their arms in the air like some hypnosis. And then when they hypnotize a little fish, they'll grab their tentacles out and they'll just, grab the prey. Here's another one. And we've just got a little video actually, which will play, which actually just shows some of the strobing.
That was so like graceful, the way it fluttered. But
yeah,
the mating, it happens for how long? Like how long do they stick together?
Well, it can actually, believe it or not, like some of them were stuck together for quite a long time. Like I think at one point there was one, it almost was like about 5 or 7 minutes or something incredible like that. So it can happen quite quickly. But what actually happens, so the male will pass his sperm package to her. She stores it under a little part sort of near to her mouth, under the mantle. And then she'll go around and she'll collect I don't know how many males she will actually mate with, but she'll mate with multiple partners until she's ready to lay her eggs. And then she'll find a nice rocky ledge to lay them, and she'll just pick one special package of sperm to fertilize her eggs. So how she decides between all the ones she's collected, I have no idea. But and then of course the baby juvenile giant cuttlefish, they will then sort of release themselves and hatch into the green seas in the spring, and then they come back to the exact same location, just like the turtles do when they hatch on the beach. The cuttlefish will come back to that exact same spot about 18 months later to have their only mating event in their life, again exactly to the same spot that their parents did the same thing, 18 months earlier.
And we don't know how long this has been happening, but this species is potentially up to 140 million years old. It's evolved over that time. So for how long it's been coming to this location, I guess nowhere near that length of time, because Australia used to be part of Gondwana a long time before that age. But anyhow.
One of the things we do know, though, is so we dived with a company called Whaler Diving Services, and the owner of that operation, Tony Bramley, has actually been diving with the cuttlefish in those waters since the late 1970s. Oh. So he's quite experienced with the cuttlefish there, quite knowledgeable, and he has seen the historic highs and lows of the species over the years. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the issues, because that's one of the things that stood out to us when we dived, was the fact that this behaviour happens nowhere else on the planet. It is so incredible to watch, and the photographs really don't actually do it justice at all, like as far as the scale of this event. But then you've got all these issues that are facing this species. So in 2013, they had a record low of only 13,000 cuttlefish that visited the breeding grounds that year. What happened was that was as a result of commercial fishing, right? So commercial fisheries really highly targeted this species in the 1990s, which led to this decline. The South Australian government then decided that, okay, we need to try and protect this species, and they put a total fishing ban of all Australian giant cuttlefish in the entire Upper Spencer Gulf.
Right.
So that was the breeding grounds itself and all the migratory paths that the cuttlefish would take to reach those breeding grounds. And then, so, you know, what happened was there was a, you know, really big increase in the species from 2013 up to 2020, where there was record cuttlefish numbers. So the most number of cuttlefish that were there any one breeding season, almost 250,000 Australian giant cuttlefish in 2020. And then last year when we dived it, there was 107,000. And, you know, if you ask some of the locals, the reasoning is because what happened is when they got to that recovery phase in February 2020, just before the start of the 2020 season, they lifted the fishing ban. So the breeding grounds themselves were still protected. So fishermen couldn't obviously take cuttlefish whilst they were breeding, but the migratory paths that they took to get to those breeding grounds were no longer protected.
This graph is the numbers of cuttlefish recorded back to 1998. And there's a few years where the count was missing, but you can see in the first 2/3 of the graph, the trend down in terms of population numbers, down to that 13,000 in 2013, 2014.
Right.
But as soon as the ban went on, where that first red arrow is, you can see the numbers recovering quite quickly, which is great, all the way up to the 247,000. And then I think this graph tells the story. The ban was lifted and the numbers went to 56% less in 1 year. So we're really waiting to see what next year's count is, to see what happens. The ban, you know, what's the impact of the ban currently now? It's not looking good. It's looking like there needs to be a review.
So the organisation that does the cuttlefish population survey is the South Australian Research Development Institute. So that's a government, South Australian government department. And, you know, we spoke to them about this issue, and they basically said that whilst, as long as the breeding grounds are protected, they seem to think that fishing of the species has a negligible impact on populations. But if you were to ask someone like I mentioned before, Tony Bramley, who runs Whaler Diving Services, who's been diving with those cuttlefish since the 1970s, his absolute view is that, you know, we don't actually know enough about the impact of commercial fisheries on this species, and therefore no one should be allowed to fish them. So, you know, we don't really know what the answer is. We know it's an incredible species and an incredible behaviour that's witnessed there. So it would be really sad to see numbers absolutely plummet again in the future. So we're hoping that doesn't happen.
So they are hunted for like food or for their skin? Or...
Yeah, no, for food. So, you know, calamari. Everyone likes squid and calamari, cuttlefish. Yeah, a lot of it's eaten here in Australia. There's also, you know, last year, I suppose another issue, and this is, I suppose, yet to be seen whether or not it's really going to be an issue or not, is that there were 2 kingfish farms that were approved in the nearby area. So round about sort of 6 to 10 kilometres away. And obviously with fish farming comes potentially an increase in the nitrogen load in the water, which can also then increase the algal blooms. Some people think that, you know, if we get increased algal blooms in those waters, then it's going to be quite difficult for the cuttlefish to actually attach their eggs to the rocky ledges. So that's another potential issue. Whether or not, you know, there's obviously strict regulations around that kingfish farm. They'll be farming about 4,000 tonnes a year of cuttlefish, of kingfish there. So we'll wait and see with that. And then, of course, ocean acidification. So that's also a potential threat because, you know, obviously with the oceans acidifying because of increased carbon in the atmosphere, what happens, it's been reported that when the cuttlefish are under higher carbon levels, they actually lay down a denser cuttle bone, which, you know, affects their buoyancy. So it's just like a diver with your BCD. So their buoyancy can be affected. Of course, that'll, you know, impact their feeding and their breeding behaviours. So, and that's it. So there's just a lucky last portrait of probably is what's our most favourite, what would you say, favourite invertebrate in the ocean, I would think.
Yeah, this is a really nice picture.
Thanks.
So
They're really
this-
nice animals. If anyone ever gets the chance to go to South Australia to dive with them, it's really easy to do. You can just grab a mask and your fins. You can just get in the water. You don't even have to scuba if you don't want to. They're in 5 to 10 metres.
That's close.
Yeah, and you can just hire your diving gear as well from Whaler Diving Services, tanks and equipment if you like, or go on a guided dive with them. They're very knowledgeable there. But yeah, it's super easy to do, but the water's pretty cold. So if you're not dry suit certified, yeah, you need a few layers of neoprene. Gets down to about 10 degrees at the end of the season in August. So it's a bit cold.
Yeah. So how did you guys prepare yourselves for this? Like, did you know? Did you research or?
Oh, we knew it would be cold.
Yeah.
We're not dry suit certified, so we just, I think, had at least probably 12 millimeters of neoprene on, didn't we?
Wow.
It was okay.
It was
It was
fine.
about I don't know, a 70-minute dive was about the limit. You're very shallow. You don't run out of air because you're so shallow. Your tank sort of comes out to still half full or more, but you've got to get out to warm up. But and sometimes the conditions, if there's a bit of wind and a bit of surge, because you're so shallow, you tend to move backwards and forwards with the cuttlefish and the seagrasses waving like this, but that's all part of it. It's really very special. Yeah, and so many of them there. It's like, it's just so great to see.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just in love with them.
Well, do you guys have any other projects coming up or what's in for 2022?
Oh, well, we're actually about to fly to Indonesia. So we've got
Today,
3 months.
Today we're flying to
Yeah?
Indonesia. Yeah.
Oh,
In February.
Yeah, so we're flying to Indonesia for 3 months to go back to some really great places that we love diving at, in Lembe, Halmahera, Triton Bay, back to the Alor archipelago. So we're looking forward to that. Of course, we haven't been able to travel internationally for the last couple of years. Being Australians, we had pretty heavy lockdowns here. But that'll be great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so thank you guys so much. We're gonna wrap up. And thank you both, Anita and Peter, for coming today. I was really pulled in by the whole presentation and the images, as well as the video. Wow. And have a wonderful trip, you guys. And
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And for our viewers, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them on our Facebook page and we will get them to answer them as soon as possible. And stay tuned for our next session happening shortly, which is Blue Green 360, the challenges in ocean conservation. Thank you guys. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.